Next up, we have a couple of people from Linklaters, and the session is entitled Making Sense of Sustainable Finance, Terms, Taxonomy and the Road Ahead. So please welcome Victor Louvet, Counsel for Investment Funds at Linklaters, and Justine Beaufy, Associate Investment Funds. Please welcome them both.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. You can hear me. Today, Justine and I are going to walk you through some of the latest developments, regulatory developments in the sustainable finance space, namely the ESMA Guidelines on fund names and the European Supervisory Authority opinion on SFDR. So, Justine, if you want to take the lead on the ESMA Guidelines.
Yeah, thank you, Victor, and hi, everyone. Thank you for having us. And so this topic on the ESMA guidelines on the fund's name couldn't be more accurate today because, as some of you may know, this week the CSF published a communiqué, and they said that they are implementing the ESMA guidelines into the regulatory framework in Luxembourg. So now the CSF expect that all the market participants, regardless of whether they are disclosing for Article 6, Article 8 or Article 9 funds, they have to perform a self-assessment on whether the fund that they are managing are actually using a correct name according to the ESMA guidelines. So before we go deeper in the subject, maybe we should ask the first question: what are the ESMA guidelines on fund names? So these ESMA guidelines are aimed to ensure a fair and not misleading information for investors when you pick a name, and especially when this name is ESG related and sustainability related, because it's important to have clear information and non-misleading information for the integrity of the financial markets. So with these ESMA guidelines, the ESMA aims to tackle the greenwashing and to prevent all the practices that are using in a misleading way some environmental information to promote one of their products. So we need to keep in mind that a fund name is a crucial information for investors because it's usually the first information that they receive about a product. And so using a correct name, and a good one, can be a very useful marketing tool. So that's why it's important that when investors receive this name, it's not misleading, because it's a key element when they decide to invest or not. So let's start with an overview of what happened with these ESMA guidelines and the past timeline. So everything started in November 2022, where the ESMA launched a public consultation on draft guidelines for funds names using ESG and sustainability related terms. And this consultation was on for 4 months, and it stopped in February 2023. During this consultation, the ESMA received about 125 responses from market participants, mainly asset managers, asset manager association, fund association, NGO, and also customer representative. And so the ESMA took into consideration these feedbacks, and with this feedback, they tried to address the comments and to amend their guidelines. And in December 2023, they came up with an updated version, which was published in May this year. And the finalized guidelines were officially published and translated in all the European official languages in August this year, on the 21st of August this year. And this year is a key element, this date is a key element because it helps to count as from when they are applicable. So just to summarize for you, for every new funds that will be implemented or established as from the 21st of November this year, the guidelines they need to comply with the guidelines. So for every new fund, as from 21st of November, they need to pick a name which is in line with the guidelines recommendation. And for existing funds that are that are already out there, with using maybe a not compliant name, they have until the 21st of May next year, 2025, missed 10 years, and to be compliant with these guidelines. And so for that, and for your information, the CSF said that they will implement a so-called fast-track procedure for these existing funds that need to amend the names by the 21st of May next year. So this fast-track procedure will only be applicable if you only change your fund's name. It will only be limited for these changes or any linked change. So that's about the timeline. So because they're going to be applicable soon, we should have a look of what they say and what are their binding requirements. But before we do that, it's important to also have a look at what was the discussion about when they received feedback from the market participants. So because main points were discussed with the market participants in order to arrive to these are the summary of all the requirements that are at the moment in the guidelines and that you need to comply with. So basically, a first important point is for all funds that are using an ESG related word or a sustainability word in their name, they must have 80% of their investment used to meet the ENS characteristic that they are promoting or the sustainable objective that they aim to achieve. This is so this is the first column, the second column, sorry. And so this is a requirement for all the ESG or sustainability related words. Then comes additional requirement for specific words. And the guidelines basically list also the relevant words and their synonyms to be sure in which scope you are. So there was a discussion on the minimum threshold for sustainable investment, because when a fund is using the term sustainable in its name, at the first, the ESMA wanted to include an additional requirement, which means that out of this 80% of investment allocated for the promotion or the objective, you also need to allocate at least 50% of your investment in sustainable investment as defined in the SFDR regulation. This provision was heavily criticized by the market because they said that the definition as included in the SFDR is too broad and cannot really work efficiently as a threshold. And so the ESMA agreed to drop this minimum percentage. So now there is no minimum sustainable percentage requirement. But instead, if you are using the word sustainable in your name, you have to commit to invest meaningfully into sustainable investment. So no minimum threshold, but you still need to make some sustainable investment in a meaningful way. Then another topic that was addressed during this consultation paper was the minimum safeguards and the Paris-aligned benchmark exclusion criteria. At first, the ESMA wanted to apply this Paris-aligned benchmark exclusion criteria to all the ESG-related words and all the sustainable-related words. But that was, for the market, a bit unfair to all the funds that have for instance, a transition strategy, a social strategy, or a governance strategy. Because for this one, they do not necessarily exclude, for instance, fossil fuel company in their investment strategy. So it would mean that for these funds, they were not able to use a proper name, like, for instance, let's say transition, because they were not excluding this Paris-aligned benchmark exclusion criteria. So that was a bit unfair for the market. So the ESMA agreed to that argument. And instead of applying the Paris-aligned benchmark, for this fund, they agreed to only apply the climate transition benchmark, sorry. So which means that only for the environmental related words and the impact, which are environmental related words, you have to comply with the Paris-aligned benchmark criteria. But for the other fund, in order to be fair with your investment strategy, especially when you are transitioning from brown to green, you're allowed to only apply the climate transition benchmark. So we see clearly that the ESMA made a difference between the environmental word and the social governance and transition words. And then they made additional requirements for the words which are related to transition and impact, because so in addition to using to have 80% of your investment aligned with to be used to meet the ENS characteristic you are promoting or the sustainable objective that you aim to achieve, if you use an impact related word, you would need to also prove that your investment are made with the intention to generate positive, measurable social or environmental impact, as well as a financial return. So that's an additional requirement if you are using an impact-related terms. And if you are using a transition-related word, then the fund must demonstrate that its investments are on a clear and measurable path to a social or environmental transition. So these are additional requirements to be allowed to use impact-related terms and transition-related terms. So then, so that's the summary. It's a bit confusing, but you will need to tick every boxes to be sure that you are picking the correct name, basically, for your fund. And then there is a question of what happens if your fund's name is using both of them. So if it's using environmental term, but also a transitional term, what do you do? So the ESMA responded to that, and they said that if you are using a transitional term, then an environmental term, you don't need to apply the Paris-aligned benchmark because it would be unfair to your transition strategy. So you can still apply the climate transition benchmark. But for every sustainability-related word, you have to comply with the first requirement of investing meaningfully in sustainable investment. So this is a moving topic. This is a it keeps us very busy at the moment to advise all asset managers how do we have to name our funds? Do we have to change our names or not? So the ESMA will continue to monitor this topic and to be sure that it's implemented correctly in the practice. And if needed, they will amend the guidelines in order to meet the market needs. And the CSF in its communiqué mentioned that they expect all market participants to take a close look at this monitoring and this evolution at both national and European level. So that was for a brief summary. I forgot my last slide, but that was for a brief summary of the ESMA guidelines, and I hand over to Victor.
Thanks a lot, Justine. Indeed, ESMA guidelines keeping us very busy, I confirm. In the next part of the presentation, we're going to have a look at the future of SFDR, and in particular, the opinion released in June 2024, where the European supervisory authorities took a deep dive into SFDR and looked at the shortcomings and how to possibly address them. So we're going to have a quick look first at those shortcomings. And the first one, which is universal across advisors, financial market participants, investors, is the complexity and usability of the templates that are being used for SFDR, being pre-contractual, periodic, website. Everyone agreed that they're a little confusing and difficult to engage with, especially when we talk about retail investors. They get easily confused and lost into the technical jargon, which is of course not the point of a disclosure regulation that is meant to increase transparency. That's the one really big critique of the SFDR. The second one is something Denise alluded to in her introduction, is that SFDR was originally used as meant to be a disclosure regulation. Basically, you're a fund, you have ESG characteristics, so sustainable investments. Here's what you need to disclose. And more, these funds have been marketed and labeled, and an Article 8 fund, Article 9 fund under SFDR has been used as a quality label, which is not what it's supposed to do. And so there is a big risk of greenwashing and mis-selling, because an investor says, well, I invested in an Article 9 fund, as though this statement alone means anything, which it doesn't. You need to look at the strategy, you need to look at percentages of sustainable investments, etc. So that's also a very big critique that's been addressed on SFDR, and the way it's interpreted and the way it's being used is that it's used as a label, which it really shouldn't. The third one, which is also something we see us as lawyers, is the different market practices in how these templates are populated, depending on who populates it. Is it a lawyer? Is it an ESG consultant? Is it a regulated fund? Is it an unregulated fund? And so for two funds that are meant to be exactly the same, two Article 9 funds or Article 8 funds, you can have two templates that look very different level of granularity of information, different level of quality of information. And these templates are there to facilitate comparison. And a lot of the time, funds simply cannot be compared on the basis of these templates because the disclosures are just too different. So that's another major critique. Another one is the limited scope of SFDR. Not every financial product is included, only a certain kind. The role of the auditors and the depository in auditing these sustainability claims that a fund make. What is the role of the auditor there? What is the role of the depository there? Does it fall within the scope of safekeeping duties? And the last critique before we move to something more positive, which I found insightful, is the digitalization. It's been pointed out that the way these disclosures are made is a little bit antiquated when we're talking about tokenization, e-trading, alternative strategies being pitched to more and younger retail investors, and then you have these kind of SFDR disclosures that looked a little bit old school. It just feels like it's time to bring SFDR to the 21st century. So that's one of the critiques as well that's been addressed to SFDR. But like I said, these are the issues that's been spotted, but there is hope. One of the major contribution and one of the major suggestion made by the European supervisory authorities is to reconsider the categories and in fact create real categories this time, not just disguised labels, Article 8, Article 9, but really have categories of fund with, on the one hand, the funds that would be sustainable funds, those that would be transition funds, and those that are simply not categorized. So they do not have any particular ESG characteristics. The transition one is an interesting one because it echoes a little bit what the ESMA guidelines have done, acknowledging there's a lot of these funds are out there and have a specific focus. They're not immediately sustainable, but they're also not brown, if you will. There are considerable investments being made in turning a fund non-sustainable into sustainable. And there was a lot of frustration in the market that these products always needed to be disclosed as a light green, even though the asset managers always felt that the effort was actually considerable in making the fund sustainable. So this would be now a standalone category, and the goal here is really to help investors understand what they're investing into, not some very general template, and then they have to read between the lines to fully understand what it is, in fact, that they're investing into, but small, smart categories that everyone can understand. And these categories could be in addition to or as an alternative to an ESG score, which is a little bit reminiscent of the SRRI bar that you can find in PRIPS-KID in retail products, where you have basically this scale telling you, how sustainable the sustainability intensity of your fund, which is, again, here the idea is to give investors an immediate sense of how sustainable is this, what am I investing into? And this goes together with the digitalization. These formats, these disclosures would be put in a format that is easier for the everyday investor to engage with, not some annex lost in a 200-page prospectus necessarily. Another point that is closely related to this is to tailor the disclosures to the particular investor. Currently, those templates that are being used, they apply across the board, regardless if you're well-informed, retail, professional, eligible counterparty, doesn't matter. Everyone is reading the same thing. And obviously, not everyone has the same capacity to understand what it is that they're reading. So the idea would be to have short-form disclosures for retail investors, again, telling them what they need to know and what they are capable of understanding. And for professional investors, go into a lot more detail. So that's an additional investment that would need to be made in terms of, depending on who you distribute your product to, this would add a little bit of complexity, but it would make the disclosures at least more efficient. Yes, the next point that the opinion emphasizes is clarifying the terms when we talk about sustainable investment. Currently, there are two notions that coexist next to each other, which is the term sustainable investments under SFDR, that is principle-based, and the term taxonomy aligned under the taxonomy regulation, which is science-based. And so these two terms sort of coexist, they interact with each other, but they're not the same. And so try explaining to an investor that they invest in a environmentally sustainable fund with 90% sustainable investments, but 0% taxonomy alignment. That's just an awkward conversation. No one understands this. And so here the push is to have a combined term, something that avoids this confusion and really emphasize the link between SFDR and taxonomy so that the concepts work together in concert and to facilitate the disclosure. Generally, enhancing, extending, which is already planned, but extending the taxonomy regulation also to social taxonomy, and generally harmonize all the EU framework, SFDR, taxonomy, MiFID, IFMD, etc. Another point of improvement that's been spotted by the opinion statement is the transparency of adverse sustainability impacts, or PASI, also a topic that's been highly debated. So here the European Supervisory Authority highlight the need for clear and quantifiable transparency, and ask for more clarification to what it means to consider principal adverse impact, which a lot of people understand to be disclose and please address how you mitigate this principal adverse impact. But here they see some merit in also adding simply the information. Even if you don't mitigate it, please inform what are those principal adverse impact. And the goal here is again to layer it depending on the type of product that you're marketing. So if you're a sustainable product, you need to disclose all the mandatory PAIs, like is currently the case. If you're a transition fund, then you disclose only certain informations, and for all other funds, it's merely short-form disclosures, again, to avoid greenwashing, disclosing informations that are just not pertinent, not relevant to a non-ESG fund. One point, we discussed the shortcomings and the fact that the disclosures are not really correlated to the needs of the investors. And one point that the authorities really emphasize is the need to have extensive consumer testing. Ask people how they feel about these templates. Do they understand it, yes or no? And always review, can we improve this? So extensive consumer testing and making sure that that the disclosures work. And finally, the last point, which addresses what I was mentioning before about the role of the auditor, the authorities do see merit in clarifying the roles of the depository in this chain. What do they do? And the auditor, something as simple as where did this SFDR report go in the annual report, which is a question we incidentally receive a lot. So clarifying all these things, the role of the auditor and the depository. So in short, these opinions, the statement takes a cautious approach. We see where things could go, but it doesn't lay out a fully formed plan as to what SFDR will look like. So this is going to be a space that will need to be closely monitored because those are just projects. A lot of asset managers have invested a lot of resources and time in conforming with the current templates, the current format. So revamping SFDR is going to take some time, but it's certainly something to be monitored. So I'm going to pause there and see if you have any questions.
Oh, I think they'd love some free advice. Here we have.
Thank you very much for your nice presentation. My question is about practice. A few days ago, we were talking about a CSSF approach regarding the reporting of an Article 8 fund. And I heard that the auditor has commented that you are doing more than Article 8 fund, and the CSSF may criticize that category because you're doing more, where I tend to disagree with that. But I was wondering, what is your experience with that?
I've never received that particular comment, but it would very much depend. So you're saying the fund is on Article 8, right? And the auditor says you're going actually further than Article 8, and you should actually be disclosing under Article 9. Is that
right? That is right. Yeah.
I mean, it will depend on the case at hand. But if you say you're in Article 8 with 80% sustainable investments, and you clearly are in the impact sphere, or in the dark green, but you choose to disclose under Article 8 to give yourself a little bit of leeway, there I can see where the auditor come from. There's no, it's very much case by case. I would doubt that the CSSF would come. At least I've never seen the CSSF be as bold as to really challenge fully a category between Article 8 or 9. This is really tricky and case by case. It's a little bit easier when you were talking about an Article 6 or an Article 9, where some asset managers, at least in the early days of SFDR, were trying to do a little bit of whitewashing, which is essentially we're doing green, but we don't want to disclose it, otherwise we're going to have to comply in full with SFDR. So this we saw at the very early stages, and I think by now everyone understands the risk with that approach, but never had that case. But I think the auditor, to answer your question fully, if depending on the case at hand, the auditor could have grounds and standing to say that. If an Article 8 indeed has essentially all of its assets as sustainable investments, describe the investment restrictions and strategy as clearly being an impact fund, you are an Article 9 fund de facto.
Another question here.
Thank you for your presentation. Regarding the regulatory technical standards that were published late last year, do we know how they articulate themselves with these new suggestions? Do we know if they have totally given up on updating the templates and instead are focusing on those suggestions for a full review, or they still keep going on with those templates?
It's a very good question. To my knowledge, these new templates published last year, they're still very much in the works. So they're still to be counted on. This is still very early stages, high level. What do we know after 3-ish years of SFDR? What could be improved? But before we see actually a total revamp, because as you saw, some of the suggestions are really turning SFDR upside down, changing a lot of fundamental things that everyone has been working on for the past 2-3 years. So far, I'd still count on the template published last year to be the way things are going.
And another question here.
Yes, thanks for your presentation. Question concerning the naming conventions. Could you maybe highlight the main differences between the UK naming convention, for example, compared to the ESMA ones, or overlaps?
I wouldn't be able to. Unfortunately, I'm not familiar enough with the UK naming convention. I'm sorry.
Anybody in the audience who could help answer that question? No. Okay, we have another question. I'll just jump around here.
Good afternoon, Nicoletta Centofanti, LSFI. My question would be, you've talked a lot about sustainable investments. What about the non-sustainable investments? Is there any reflection, any expectations, any activities around non-sustainable investments? Because I believe now the regulators are just setting up an unbalanced field whereby sustainable products are required to disclose and non-sustainable products have an easy way. And we've noticed in other panels that impact fund didn't disclose as per Article 9 because it was too cumbersome. So are you expecting to see anything coming up for non-sustainable investments?
I mean, currently the only mandatory disclosures is under the taxonomy regulation. If you're neither Article 8 or 9, you have to disclose that none of your investments are taxonomy aligned. So that's one disclosure, and it's supposed to be a prominent statement. So that the term prominent is very much debatable when you see how little it's written in some prospectuses. But this is one of the obligation. In terms of further obligation, as you saw there is the European supervisory authorities would see some merit in creating not a default category, but really its own category of non-sustainable products. What it would look like, we're not sure, but we haven't seen any further developments in that space. Obviously, the SFDR is there to encourage whenever you make any sustainability claim to disclose under Article 8 or Article 9, so that de facto they're trying to reduce as much as possible the scope of Article 6 to make sure that as many asset managers as possible go into the ESG space and promote ESG characteristics. But in terms of non-sustainable product, we are not aware of any developments in that field.
Any other questions from the floor? Well, with that, thank you so much, the Linklaters team.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much on that complex and confusing topic.